Just how strong is the case against alleged child rapist Jerry Sandusky? How will the prosecution prove its charges? And what defense will his attorneys present? We have some of the best legal minds in the business here to break down the case of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania versus Jerry Sandusky, and their analysis starts right now on It's Your Call. It is a case that some say goes as far back as the mid-90s. But despite earlier allegations against him, Jerry Sandusky has never been charged until now. So what does the Commonwealth have now that it didn't have then? That's just one of the questions that we have for our panel this hour. Hello, everyone. It's good to have you with us. I'm Lynn Doyle. I think I'm like everyone else when I ask, why has it taken so long for charges to be brought against Jerry Sandusky if, in fact, there have been suspicions, allegations, even an eyewitness account way back in 2002? Why, then, is it toward the end of 2011 that charges were actually filed? Is it because it took the state that long to build a case against him, or perhaps because no one would accuse him outright? Do you think too many people just look the other way? Or is it actually possible that he might be innocent, that his actions that he calls horseplay have been misinterpreted? Well, those questions I'm posing to you. Why do you think it's taken so long? Do you think his case is a strong one against him? And do you believe that he could be unjustly accused? You can start emailing me your opinions right now. Email me directly at lynn@lynndoyle.net. As always, you can find us on Facebook and Twitter. And of course, this show will be seen on YouTube as well. Those questions is where I will be starting with my guests this hour, who include old friends of the show. Bruce Castor is the former district attorney for Montgomery County, Pennsylvania, and is now a county commissioner there. And Tariq El-Shabazz is a former Philadelphia assistant district attorney, now in private practice at El-Shabazz and Harris, LLC. Representing the defense side, our good friend Charles Peretto Jr., who is a Philadelphia defense attorney, and another good friend, Jeff Gold, who's a criminal defense attorney with the law offices of Gold and Associate. He is a former New Jersey prosecutor. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being with us. I certainly appreciate having you back with us. Bruce, I'm going to start with you as probably the longest public servant in Montgomery County, Pennsylvania, including a long stint as the district attorney there. How strong is the case that the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania has against Jerry Sandusky?
Well, it is getting stronger as the publicity has permeated the area there for a number of reasons. That, of course, multiple victims tend to not only increase the number of charges, but it intends to increase the credibility of other victims. So, in other words, the more individual victims you have, the more a jury would tend to believe the totality of what they're saying. So, I mean, if there was only one victim, that could cause a difficult time for the prosecutor. Two victims gets better. When you start to multiply that, it improves dramatically. I
have to talk about credibility, though, because there's a question of how much credibility there can be if all of a sudden everyone comes out of the woodwork once one allegation is made. Why weren't these people coming out, Tariq, 10 years ago?
Well, the unique thing about a sexual offense or sex crimes is that, especially when they actually happen to males, is that people are not jumping at the bit or chopping at the bit to come forward because of the embarrassment that it occurs, the stigma that comes along with it. And sometimes it takes an individual that prosecutors like to call the brave victim. The brave victim to step forward. And once that brave victim steps forward, other people become as brave. They're not out there by themselves. They're not hung out to dry. Now people believe the story or believe the allegations or believe what actually occurred more than they did originally.
Is that why the 10-year time frame may work for the defense? Because, number one, a long period of time has passed, and number two, no one said anything, at least to law enforcement officials, in 2002?
Well, it cuts both ways. I mean, when the case garnishes this much publicity, as Tariq said, the brave of the brave, the bravest of the brave might not come forward saying, I don't want to be on television in China because I was sexually molested. I'll leave it for everyone else. Well, when you hear that there's 8 victims or 10 victims, you could feel comfortable that there's enough to prove this guy guilty and they don't need me. The problem is with these cases, as we all know at this table, that could happen in 100% of the victims and nobody comes forward for the Commonwealth.
The fact that people are coming forward now and making these allegations, Jeff, does that mean that the Commonwealth will have a slam dunk case, or is it actually more challenging for the state to prosecute this because there's such a long period between the offense and now the trial?
Well, I mean, the time period is a problem for the state in every case, but with the floodgates being open, the more victims you have, the more chances that many of them are credible. If you just had one victim, then you may have, like a Michael Jackson case, you work with the one victim's family, there may be some defenses. The chances that you can do that to 8 or 10 or 12 is very remote. And what we have here is Penn State as well. These kids not only didn't come forward because they were 10-year-old boys, which I agree 100% is what happens in many cases, but then on top of it, you have the religion of Penn State. And once that's open, it's like the Catholic Church. Once it's open and everybody tends to believe priests could do this, you don't feel so awkward about coming forward. Now people think Penn State, okay, whatever.
So what's the first charge of the Commonwealth? What does it need to do? It was 3 years with a grand jury investigation. Do they feed off of what's included in the grand jury, or do they start fresh?
Well, no, they'll use the grand jury presentment. That there's a difference between an indictment and a presentment. And a presentment is a recommendation from the grand jury that the district attorney, or in this case the attorney general, will charge someone with a series of offenses. That will be the beginning point. They will not have included all that they know in the grand jury presentment, but that would be the starting point. When you're talking about sex offenses, especially involving children, these are going to be oath-on-oath cases. There's not going to be a lot of scientific, if any scientific evidence. It's going to be simply weight of the evidence coming out of the mouths of victims. So you have to deal with that whole end of it. The other side of the coin is the prosecutor has to be prepared to deal with the complaints of the delay. And in any sort of a case that is done in secret, a defense is going to be, I could not have done it because I wasn't there. Well, Sandusky's not going to be able to say where he was 3 years ago on a particular Tuesday or whatever. So the prosecutor's going to have a good reason why it took so long to get to where they did. Otherwise, Sandusky's defense is hurt.
Which is why it's so shocking that his defense lawyer and Sandusky himself went on television and said, "Oh yes, I was in the shower with him that day. I remember it clearly. I was just horsing around." I couldn't believe that he put him on television.
Yeah, that was a
to say that he
stunning
remembered that, and he just blew his Ross motion.
That was a
actually,
stunning
we're
thing.
going to have that interview later in the show, and we'll talk more about it then.
But I agree with Chuck on the Ross issue, which is the delay hurting the defense. But there's another part to it. If the defendant out of his own mouth agrees with 85% of what the witnesses are saying, it's not a big stretch to get it to 100%. I mean, that enhances the witness's credibility already.
We have these victims in the grand jury report. What's the likelihood that they'll actually get into open court and testify? Is that something that the defense needs to fight against, or is it pretty certain that they will, if they talk to the grand jury,
if they have a trial?
But
I don't think it's ever going to get to a trial, frankly. There's way too many victims and newer ones. These are 8 and 10-year-old kids at the time that are now adults. I don't think you're going to get that far.
I finally disagree with you, because I think this case will go to trial, because Sandusky's never going to enter into a plea that's going to be acceptable at his age. And to go to trial, you're going to expose these witnesses as individuals, and you're going to expose the Commonwealth in the way they handled this case. They've been presenting witnesses to the grand jury for 3 years, but they've been investigating at the Attorney General for 5 years. What takes so long? You're not going to convince me that it takes 3 years to get these witnesses together before the grand jury, or 5 years to investigate them in toto. It should take you 6 months.
Maybe if you had different victims. Yeah, I disagree with Chuck with respect to that, and that's nothing new. I'm always going to disagree with Charles, especially with respect to this show. But the difference is this. When you have sensitive issues, sensitive victims, rape is a very sensitive crime, especially if it involves young boys or young girls, for that matter. When you have sensitive victims, you have to work that methodically. Now, does that justify waiting 5 years? Absolutely not. Does it even justify waiting 3 years? Absolutely not. But there's an understanding that a juror can have with respect to a particular delay, and you're going to have to answer that question. The other thing you're going to have to deal with is looking into the eyes of these particular individuals and making a determination whether or not they're lying or not. And with a child, they're going to get a pass on certain things. If their memory fades, they're going to get a pass on that. If in fact they're inaccurate about certain things, they're going to get a pass on that. They'll get a pass more so than an adult with respect to a case. So I'm not as clear as Chuck is that this is a case that the defense is going to be able to attack.